It happened so quickly, yet my whole world seemed to slow down in that moment. The heavy glass doors of the boardroom shut behind me with a hush, leaving only the quiet hum of the air conditioner and the faint ticking of the clock on the far wall. My hands trembled as I placed the contract on the polished mahogany table, sliding it toward the CEO with what I hoped was steady confidence. It was supposed to be the proudest moment of my career, finally entrusted to handle a deal of this size, to sit across from a man whose name alone opened doors in every corner of the business world. But then, his eyes flicked down to the papers. My own followed, almost unconsciously, scanning page 3 as he turned it over. And that was when my breath caught in my chest. There, beneath the typed clauses and legal jargon, was a signature I knew better than my own. Bold, slanted, unmistakable. The loops of the capital letters, the flourish at the end of the last name, burned into my memory since childhood. It was my father's. I froze. My heart pounded so hard I thought the CEO might hear it across the table. My father had been gone from my life for years. A man who had walked away without explanation, who left behind silence instead of closure. We hadn't spoken in more than a decade. And now, here he was, his name, his mark, etched into a document that could change the trajectory of my career forever. The CEO was speaking, something about clauses and conditions, but his voice seemed muffled, as though I were underwater. My mind raced with questions. Why was my father's signature here? Was it forged? Or worse, had he been part of this company all along, hidden behind the curtain of power and influence, watching me without my knowledge? I wanted to ask. I wanted to scream. Instead, I just sat there, my fingers digging into my palms beneath the table, trying not to give away the storm inside me. At that instant, I knew. This wasn't just business anymore. This was personal. And nothing about the path ahead would be simple. Sometimes the past hides in the unlikeliest of places, waiting for the moment it will change everything. When I left that boardroom, the contract tucked under my arm, I tried to convince myself I had imagined it. Maybe I was seeing things, projecting old wounds onto a piece of paper. But the image of that signature haunted me like an echo I couldn't silence. I had memorized my father's handwriting as a child, because for years it was all I had left of him. Notes tucked into my lunchbox, scribbled reminders on sticky pads, even the way he'd sign his name on my birthday cards, always with a little star drawn in the corner, like his secret stamp of affection. You don't forget things like that, and you don't mistake them either. Still, I couldn't let my coworkers see my distraction. I worked in a world where hesitation was weakness, and weakness meant someone else would snatch your chance before you even blinked. So I forced myself into the rhythm of the office. Handshakes, polite laughter in the corridors, tapping back emails as though nothing unusual had happened. But inside, I was restless. That night, I spread the contract on my kitchen table under the glow of the single overhead lamp. My small apartment felt even smaller with the weight of those pages before me. There it was again, my father's name. The ink had long since dried, but to me, it pulsed with questions. The company I worked for was powerful, yes, but their reach didn't usually intersect with my family. My father had never been a titan of industry, or at least, that was what I believed. He had worked quietly, often late hours, but nothing that suggested he belonged in the rarefied world I now navigated. Or had he hidden more than I realized? I traced the signature with my finger, half afraid that touching it might break the spell. That's when I noticed something else. The date. It wasn't recent. It was from years ago, around the time my father had disappeared. My throat went dry. If this document was genuine, it meant my father hadn't simply left us. He had been tied, somehow, some way, to this company, this CEO, this world. The puzzle had been set before me, and I felt a quiet, burning resolve. I wasn't just going to deliver contracts anymore. I was going to uncover the truth. Every family has secrets. The real question is whether we're ready to face them when they surface. The next morning, I walked into the office with a knot in my stomach. The contract burned in my briefcase like a live coal, its weight reminding me that nothing in my life was as straightforward as it seemed yesterday. The CEO, Mr. Harlan, called me back into his office before I even had the chance to settle at my desk. His reputation preceded him, sharp, calculating, a man who wasted neither words nor sympathy. He gestured for me to sit, his eyes resting on me in a way that made me feel, as though he was peeling back layers I didn't even know I had. "Good work yesterday," he said flatly, tapping the contract with a long finger. "But this isn't just a deal, you understand? It's a test." That word, test, hung in the air like smoke. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "This company thrives on loyalty. Every signature, every agreement, every hand that touches these papers, it binds us. You'll need to prove that you belong here, that you can carry not only the weight of responsibility, but also of discretion. Do you understand?" I nodded, though my heart was racing. Proof, discretion, belong. It all sounded like more than corporate jargon. Then he added something that made my skin prickle. "You will find that our past is never irrelevant. We value bloodlines here, as much as brains. Sometimes more." Bloodlines. I swallowed hard, careful not to reveal the storm his words unleashed inside me. Did he know? Did he already suspect the connection between me and the signature buried in his contract? Or was this part of some unspoken company ritual, an initiation meant to test how far I would go to protect secrets not my own? The unspoken rules crystallized in my mind. 1. Never ask a question unless you're prepared for the answer. 2. Never reveal what you see until you know the cost of sharing it. 3. Never mistake silence for safety. I walked out of his office with my pulse drumming in my ears. It was clear now. I wasn't just an employee anymore. I was being watched, measured, judged. And somehow, my father was already tangled in the web. The rules of this game had been set before I even arrived, and breaking them might mean losing everything. Sometimes the first test of character isn't about action. It's about knowing when to hold your tongue. Over the next week, the office felt less like a workplace and more like a maze. Every corridor seemed to whisper. Every conversation felt coded. I found myself replaying Mr. Harlan's words in my head. Bloodlines matter here. The contract became my secret map. Late at night, when others had long since left the building, I would slip back into the archives under the guise of extra research. The company kept meticulous records, thick binders, digital backups, contracts stacked like bricks in a fortress of power. I started with the obvious, other deals signed around the same time as my father's signature. And slowly, a pattern emerged. The same handful of names appeared, again and again, circling each other in legal agreements and partnerships. They weren't random business partners. They were families. Old families. Their surnames carried weight in certain circles, finance, land, even politics. I realized then that this company wasn't merely a corporation. It was a network, a dynasty disguised as a business, built on legacies and bound by documents like the one in my possession. And my father's name was part of it. One night, alone in the archive room, I pulled out another contract. Same year, different project. And there it was again, the same bold signature. This time, next to a clause that tied him directly to a trust I'd never heard of. My father hadn't just worked with them. He had invested himself into their foundation. But why had he never told us? I leaned back in the chair, the hum of the fluorescent lights above me buzzing like an interrogation. Maybe he hadn't left because of us. Maybe he had been swallowed by them. The puzzle deepened when I stumbled across a small leather-bound notebook tucked between two thick binders. It wasn't company property. It was personal. The initials on the inside cover stopped me cold. JTR. My father's initials. The pages were filled with brief notes, cryptic lines, half-finished thoughts. One entry in particular caught my breath. The choice will not be mine alone. If they test her, she must not fail. Her. Could he have meant me? It was as if my father had left breadcrumbs scattered through time, waiting for me to find them. The more I uncovered, the more I realized this wasn't just about a signature. It was about inheritance, not of money, but of trials, of secrets, of a test I hadn't even known I was born into. When the past leaves clues, it does so with purpose. And the question becomes, are we brave enough to follow them? I barely slept the night I found that notebook. I must have read the same sentence 20 times, tracing each letter with my eyes until it etched itself into my memory. If they test her, she must not fail. The following morning, I carried the weight of that line into the office. Every handshake, every polite nod from my colleagues seemed different now. Were they part of this? Did they know who I really was? Or were they blind to the deeper currents, as I had been until now? By lunchtime, I couldn't take the silence anymore. I slipped away from the cafeteria and went to the quietest corner of the building, a narrow atrium with tall windows overlooking the city. It was there, staring out at the skyline, that a memory surfaced. I was 9 years old, sitting on a park bench with my father. We were feeding pigeons, the city alive around us. He had pulled a sandwich from his coat pocket, torn it in half, and handed me a piece. Then, in that quiet, he had said something I'd never understood as a child. One day, someone will test not what you know, but who you are. Remember, strength isn't in saying yes, it's in knowing when to say no. Back then, I thought he was talking about playground bullies or peer pressure at school. But now, with the CEO's piercing eyes still fresh in my memory and my father's signature staring at me from the contract, I understood. He had been preparing me for this moment all along. The revelation hit me like a sudden chill. My father hadn't abandoned us. He had walked away because he was part of something he couldn't explain, something that demanded secrecy, perhaps even sacrifice. And somehow, he had known that one day, his daughter would stand where I was now, facing the very same test. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window, my reflection faint and fragile. This wasn't about climbing the corporate ladder anymore. This was about legacy, about whether I could carry the torch my father had left behind, or reject it entirely. But one thing was certain: silence and avoidance would no longer protect me. The test was already underway. Sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. It binds you to a choice you can no longer escape. From that day forward, everything sharpened. The smallest details at work now carried hidden meanings. An offhand comment from a senior partner. A sudden pause in conversation when I entered the room. Even the way people glanced at me during meetings, as though weighing something I couldn't name. The notebook never left my bag. I carried it like a talisman, rereading my father's cryptic notes whenever doubt crept in. Each line felt like a whisper across time, urging me to pay attention. One entry read, "They test kindness as much as cunning." Another warned, "Do not mistake wealth for power. Power sits in silence." But the deeper I searched, the more tangled the web became. One evening, Mr. Harlan summoned me into his office again. The blinds were drawn, the room shadowed except for the desk lamp casting long streaks of light across the contract I had delivered days earlier. "You've been working late," he said, his tone even but probing. I froze. Did he know I'd been in the archives? Before I could answer, he slid a new folder across the desk. Another agreement. Smaller in scope, but important nonetheless. "I want you to deliver it personally." The folder was sealed, but I caught a glimpse of the signature page. My stomach dropped. It wasn't just my father's name this time. It was mine, typed neatly under a blank line, waiting for me to sign. I looked up at Harlan, my throat dry. "Why me?" His lips curved into something between a smile and a warning. "Because loyalty is proven through action. Blood may open the door, but choice determines whether you walk through it." The message was clear. I was being pulled into the family of the company, whether I wanted it or not. And the contract in front of me wasn't just paperwork. It was a binding oath. That night, back in my apartment, I stared at the folder for hours. If I signed, I tied myself to their world, just as my father had. If I refused, I risked not only my career, but perhaps uncovering truths I wasn't ready to face. The pigeons in my childhood memory came back to me, greedy, fighting over crumbs, blind to the bigger picture. Was I just another bird at their table? The complications were no longer theoretical. The test was becoming real, personal, and dangerously close to final. The hardest choices are never between right and wrong. They're between two versions of who you might become. I didn't sleep the night before the meeting. The contract sat on my table like a silent judge, the blank line beneath my name glowing every time I glanced at it. By dawn, I felt like I had lived through a war entirely in my own head. When I walked into the boardroom, the atmosphere was heavier than usual. The senior partners were already seated, their faces unreadable. Mr. Harlan stood at the head of the table, the sealed folder in front of him. He motioned for me to sit. "This is the moment," he said quietly, his voice carrying an edge that cut through the air. "Every member here has faced it. Every one of us has chosen. Today, it's your turn." He opened the folder and slid it across the table. My own name gleamed back at me from the signature line, waiting like a trap or an invitation. "Before you sign," Harlan continued, "understand this. Once your name is here, you carry not only the privileges but also the burdens of our circle. There is no stepping back. Do you accept that?" The room was silent, every pair of eyes fixed on me. I swallowed hard, the notebook's words echoing in my mind. They test kindness as much as cunning. I remembered my father on that park bench, tearing his sandwich in half, telling me that strength wasn't in saying yes. It was in knowing when to say no. I took a deep breath and pushed the contract back across the table. With respect, I won't sign something I don't fully understand. A ripple went through the room. Some faces turned cold, others intrigued. Harlan's expression tightened, though his eyes, sharp as steel, narrowed with something that looked almost like approval. "You do realize," he said slowly, "that refusing this contract could end your career here. It could close doors you'll never open again." I met his gaze, forcing my voice not to tremble. "Then I'll face that. But I won't bind myself blindly. My father's choices aren't mine. I need the truth before I put my name next to his." For a long, terrible moment, no one spoke. The silence pressed down, so heavy I thought I might collapse under it. Then Harlan leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "So you are his daughter," he said at last. The room shifted, whispers cutting through the tension. I had confirmed the connection without meaning to. And with that, the confrontation was no longer about contracts or careers. It was about identity, legacy, and the shadow of my father's choices. Sometimes confrontation isn't about fighting back. It's about standing still, even when the ground shakes beneath you. The silence in the boardroom stretched until I thought it might break me. Then Harlan lifted a hand, and the whispers died instantly. His gaze, sharp and unflinching, locked on mine. "You think your father abandoned you," he said. "That he chose this company over his family. But that's not the truth." My heart lurched. Every nerve in my body urged me to run, but I stayed rooted to the chair. Harlan continued, his voice lower now, almost confessional. "Years ago, your father stood exactly where you sit. He refused the contract too. He wouldn't sign, not because he lacked loyalty, but because he wanted to protect you. He knew if he bound himself fully, they would one day test his daughter. So he stepped away. He gave up everything, power, wealth, influence, so that when this day came, you could choose freely." The word struck me like a blow. My father hadn't left out of selfishness. He had left out of love. Every year of silence, every unanswered question, had been his sacrifice so I wouldn't be forced into this legacy before I was ready. I felt heat rise behind my eyes, but I refused to let the tears fall here, in front of them. Instead, I asked, "And if I refuse now?" Harlan studied me for a long moment before replying. "Then you walk away, like he did. But understand this, walking away means more than leaving this company. It means carrying the knowledge of what you've seen and never speaking of it. It means living with the truth that your father bore alone. And it means building a life not from inheritance, but from your own strength." I thought of the pigeons in the park, squabbling for crumbs, blind to the bigger picture. I thought of my father tearing that sandwich in half, teaching me in his quiet way that generosity and choice mattered more than control. And in that moment, clarity washed over me. I didn't need their power, their legacy, or their chains. My father's real gift to me wasn't a seat at their table. It was the freedom to walk away. I stood, my voice steady. "Then I choose as he did. I choose my own path." Gasps filled the room. Harlan's lips curved into the faintest smile, as though this was the answer he had expected all along. He nodded once. "Then you've passed the only test that ever mattered." The contract lay untouched on the table as I turned and walked out. For the first time in years, the weight of my father's absence felt lighter, not because he was gone, but because I finally understood what he had given me. Some legacies are not written in ink, but in the courage to choose differently. The air outside the building felt different that day, cleaner somehow, freer. The glass towers of the city loomed above me, but instead of feeling small beneath them, I felt steady. My father's absence no longer gnawed at me like an open wound. It had become something else, a quiet inheritance of wisdom. That evening, I walked to the park where he used to take me as a child. The bench was still there, worn by years of strangers sitting and waiting, thinking and resting. I bought a sandwich from a food cart nearby and sat down, just as we once had. The pigeons came, greedy and relentless, pecking at the crumbs I tossed their way. And I smiled. The memory of my father's voice came back clear as day. Strength isn't in saying yes. It's in knowing when to say no. For the first time, I whispered aloud, "I understand now, Dad. Thank you." The city kept moving around me. Buses hissing, children laughing, couples strolling. But I sat still, knowing I had chosen not just a career path, but a way of living. I would build my future on integrity, not on secrets, on kindness, not on fear. And if my father were here, I think he would have nodded in quiet approval, just as Harlan had. We are all handed contracts in life, some written on paper, others invisible, but no less binding. What matters most isn't the wealth they promise, but whether we have the courage to sign or the wisdom to walk away. So I ask you, what contract are you holding in your life right now? And what would it mean to choose differently? Because sometimes the greatest inheritance we can ever receive is freedom.